Hello. Well, it's very late or very early in the morning, and I figured I'd make a video I've been wanting to make since the Hangout. I had some conversations since then in comment threads that have just, you know, amplified that desire. Basically, the idea is to Vic. You want to say that we have this inner city crime problem, and we have to face facts that there's a cultural issue involved with this. And I have accepted, okay. But you don't seem to get or to be engaging with the fact that if I accept that, then you have to accept that also as a general principle. When you see a particular community or culture demographically, right? Because you're not seeing a culture commit a crime, you're seeing for some ethnicity, African Americans, for example, inner city crime. And you're saying, well, look, it's got to be the culture, when you have this kind of statistical situation. But then when I bring up the bankers and that they're all white, you said in the Hangout, oh, they just happen to be the people owning banks. So the people doing white collar crime just happen to be white, and the people doing inner city crime in poor neighborhoods happen to be black, right? White people just happen to own banks, some white people, and some black people just happen to live in the inner city and be prone to the violent culture that's there. And I wouldn't even say it's really directly from poverty, it's related, but it's also just the violence of the neighborhood. I mean, there's impoverished neighborhoods that don't have that kind of crime problem, but in the urban situation, we see more factors coming together to this phenomena that we see of the inner city crime and really how terrible it is and how it ruins trying to live in the city, as far as I'm concerned. It's why I don't want to live in the city. So yeah, I see that it's serious. But where this goes is in my direction, because if you're going to say, oh, I have to pay attention to the culture, then you have to pay attention to the culture of other kinds of crimes. You can't pretend that's not a crime just because nobody goes to jail. The fact that nobody goes to jail is obviously a cultural artifact if a crime has been committed and people aren't going to jail. And crimes have been committed. It's very straightforward and easy to find out, unless you don't want to, that crimes have been committed in that case. Fraud, various crimes, not to mention gross incompetence unto the point of negligence. Right? So we both have to take that into account. And then, of course, I'm going to point out that really the statistical likelihood of a crime is not based on race, but is based on poverty cultures and the kind of poverty cultures we have. And of course, as a liberal, I would explain things like that, in dynamic social terms, things we can do about that. I still embrace individual responsibility. I mean, an individual that's mugging someone goes to jail as a mugger. But if you're trying to solve the problem of it in a particular neighborhood, there's too much of that kind of crime. Well, you can't just go, well, it's that person's fault, unless that's just a way to say, don't do anything about it. It's the person's fault. You know whose fault it is. That was the goal. Find out whose fault it is. Now you know who to blame. Can't stop it. No, we're trying to address it. So when there's an individual, the individual goes into the criminal justice system. But when there is a political decision to make, we look at the dynamics that are generating that situation, if there are any, and there are. And yes, we can address that in cultural means. But again, it cuts both ways. What is the culture of being above the law that's going on in our big businesses? There's this methane leak in California, right? Nobody's to blame for that. Nobody's culpable, right? It's like if there was a bank robbery and you just said, yeah, but nobody was culpable. The bank robber had a reason, and it looks like a crime, but that's a culture of forgiveness. That's a culture which has the idea that you have, where you would distrust a poor person, you said, rather than a wealthy person in terms of screwing you over, stealing something from you. And I don't share that, right? I think that uh, wealthy criminals commit white collar crimes and poorer criminals don't. Poorer criminals also go to jail, and white collar criminals mostly don't. Right. And I see those as cultural issues. And just as I would say that really the reason you have an ethnic statistic showing up is because that ethnicity has been kept in our inner cities and poorer cultures. Not entirely, which is why you see African American doctors and lawyers and presidents and the rest. Not every single one, but the bulk, a statistical bulk, the lump of the curve has been kept in there. And you could use the same kind of explanation for the culture that doesn't want to send bankers, frauds, to jail. You could find out forgivenesses for that as well. That would explain it. Would that mean that the individual bankers that committed fraud shouldn't go to jail? No, they should as individuals. But when you look at the systematics, you might find, hey, it's just we should teach this a different way, or do this, or create this different situation, or tax things differently, or create regulations differently so they don't invite corruption or are harder to corrupt. But then just to go back as a summary, if you want to insist on accepting that there's a cultural factor in inner city crime, I accept that. But then you have to accept the cultural factor in white collar crime. You have to accept that. And then we both are going to be able to explain the evolution of culture through a historical pattern, which brings me to a PS. I often refer to history and you go, oh yeah, but this is now. How long? What do you consider relevant history? How far back does it go? Can I go back a year, 2, 3, 5? Can I go back 20? Can I just go back through my lifetime? What? I would like to know, because I'm getting tired of you acting like taking history into account is living in the past. That's not how I see it. I say not taking history, all the history you could learn, easily centuries, thousands of years of history are learnable, and I think you should take it all into account. Things aren't exactly like they've always been, but things aren't exactly entirely different either, are they? But you tell me, how long do you find relevant? Can I use the history of the United States, that we've had a singular institution that survived that time, the American government? Can I do that? Because it seems like not. You think 200 years, 150 years is, I'm getting the impression you think that's too long. So what is it, 50, 60? Am I allowed to take lessons from Eisenhower? You know, things that worked back in the 50s, making the international, or maybe it was even the 40s, the interstate highway system. Can I use that as an example of a successful infrastructure, or is that just ancient history, not relevant? That's what I would like to know. As a PS, don't forget the summary of the actual video. All right, cheers.